One of the questions is asking about the relationship between yoga and attunement with nature. Some of these questions I'm going to answer what I feel you may actually be asking. The question, because yoga talks about yoga, by that I mean all that we're teaching, the teaching of self-realization, teaches you to concentrate more on the inner world. The obvious question is, am I supposed to reject this world around me? Do I have to, how can I use the creation to interiorize my energy rather than reject it? Keshwar, are we capable of singing? Well, they don't know the English. Swami wrote a song, and he took many aspects of nature, the birds, the flowers, the stars, the trees, the rivers, and it was in precise answer to this question, which is, how do we spiritualize our relationship with the world around us? Because this beautiful earth is given to us. It's no accident that we're here. Also, they say that the world we're looking at here is a copy of the even more beautiful world we're looking at in the astral realm. And so we can tune into the deeper dimension of it by tuning into what's expressed here, just the way we tune into the deeper dimension of each other. And also, everything in the physical world is a symbol of a higher reality, which is a very interesting phrase. Even human mothers, in their sacrifice and in their selfless love, they represent to us the unconditional love of God. The sun itself is a symbol of the spiritual eye. Because the external world seems so much bigger than the internal world, we think that the internal world would be based on the external one, but it's actually the opposite. So in an effort to help us to get in tune with the purpose of God's creation, Swami wrote the song, the birds sing of freedom as they soar lightly on the air. So may our hearts soar high above all curbs and cares. So we sing that song, and then every time we look at birds, we can participate in the symbolic and upward meaning of the birds. Trees standing firm hold the secret of inner power. Give us, when tested, strength to endure. So it's an affirmation, but it's also every time you see a tree, you tune into the energy vibration of that tree, and you tune into why God made trees. Rivers seek passage unhindered by rock or tree. So may our lives flow steadfast toward the sea. And so we take our natural inclination for the beauty and the experience of this world, and then we also direct our energy in such a way that from the outer beauty we go deeper into the inner beauty. And that's, what that does is, you see, this is other questions. How do I live minute by minute? There's never a situation in which there isn't a spiritual dimension to it if you can find it. And the more you can turn every mundane experience into a God-reminding experience, the more dynamically you can live in this world. This was a question that was also asked about how in daily life can you purify your chakras? Well, every action, every thought, every feeling is changing that energy pattern. Who you are when you arrive this morning is different than who you are this afternoon. See, in Kali Yuga, things are physical, they get their position and they stay there. In an energy universe, it's always shifting. This is also very important, what I call myself, even if I've had traumas, even if I've been mistreated in certain ways, even if I've had profound disappointments, it doesn't exist except as an energy pattern. And just as the flow of the river, when the river is flowing more strongly, then the obstruction to the flow of the river, the obstruction is absorbed in the river. So all the time we're in a balance like this. And every time you see these vortices of energy have magnetism. So we're going along trying to be happy, but our effort to be happy is a little bit weaker than the habit of being sad. I think of our chakras, I think of my consciousness like a ping pong ball, which is very light. And so it's floating on the river of my consciousness, and then it's whirling around like that. And it feels like it's been kidnapped, That's why I think of it as a ping pong ball instead of a soccer ball or a stone, because I'm just going along just fine, and then boom, I'm in one of those vortices again. But the important thing is to realize it's just a vortex of energy. And so, yes, it captured me, but if I use whatever methods I have to get back into the flow, then it may happen again. But if I also keep cultivating a higher, clearer, better way of thinking, gradually it's the strangest thing. It's like you'll be tilted a certain way because a certain vritti is stronger than the rest of your habits. But if you keep trying, then one day it just tips the other direction. I remember a very almost specific day when all of a sudden, where before I'd had an inclination in a certain unhelpful way, but I'd been struggling for 12 years. It was after 12 years of spiritual practice. It just tipped. And it didn't tip like that. It just tipped a tiny bit. But it was enough that the ping pong ball started rolling in the direction I wanted it to roll. And that's how real change takes place. So what you have to think about is not what you're doing wrong, but what you can do right. And when your ping pong ball goes into the vritti and spins for a while, you do your best to get it out. But even worrying about it or obsessing about it will just make that whirlpool stronger. You're not repressing it. You're not pretending it's not there. It's just, why give it more energy? Just let me put energy where I want it to be. There's a true story about a disciple of Yogananda. He was an alcoholic, and he also took initiation into the Kriya meditation practice. And as a Kriya practitioner, he has the mala, the beads, the prayer beads. So he literally, this is true, he literally had a glass of scotch over here and a Kriya mala over here. And he would do a few rounds of his Kriya practice, which is essentially a controlled cycle with the inhalation and the exhalation. Do a few rounds of Kriya, sip a little whiskey, a few rounds of Kriya, sip a little whiskey. Now, alcohol and meditation are polar opposites. Meditation is lifting you into super consciousness. Alcohol takes you into a happy dream in subconscious. They're completely opposite. So some more prim and proper disciple of Yogananda criticized this man because essentially, how dare you, practice the sacred meditation technique and drink scotch at the same time. The disciple said, I can't help my bad habit, but I can at least act on my good habit. And then, as it was described, that one day he was doing his normal practice, and he looked at his mala and he looked at the scotch, and he put the scotch down and he never touched it again because he'd tipped the balance. So what we have to do is just every opportunity try to do this is how I put it. I put it at a very low standard because I prefer to succeed at a very low standard than fail at one that's too high. So a very low standard is do a little better than your worst. I became upset with someone once over something they did, and at the time we were in a public place. I was really annoyed. And so I started playing this game with myself. What is the best I could do? What is the worst I could do? The worst was really obvious. I could begin to scream and pound the table, perhaps pound the person. All those were the options. Or I could offer Christ-like understanding of, that everybody has difficulties and I should just love anyway. Christ-like understanding was not an option. So I had to consider whether I pounded the person. That wasn't necessary. So I moved up from that. Then it becomes a question of, do I create a scene right here in a public place in front of a lot of friends, or do I wait till there's a little more privacy? That's something, maybe I could do that. So I just kept sort of bringing up the bottom and bringing down the top until we got to the point where, I could wait long enough till I was at least not going to lose it completely, but there was no question I could let this pass. A little better than my worst. It sounds like nothing. I promise you, if you consistently do a little better than your worst, and this is even small things. An absurd example I always use, but many of you can relate to it. I do not like housework. I'm very proud to say, at the age that I am, I've managed to do very little. I'm always willing to work a little more to pay someone else to do it. And I'm very pleased that this method has worked. But I will deal with the kitchen. I like to cook. But the dishes, sometimes you just don't want to deal with them. I have friends who cannot go to sleep if the kitchen is not completely clean. I can sleep like a baby no matter what the kitchen is. I have mastered that skill. Okay? However, I look at it sometimes and I think the only reason you're not doing this is because you're not putting out enough energy. So ideally, I would clean the whole kitchen before I go to bed. Not an option. But I can at least stack up the dirty dishes. So a little better than my worst. And you choose something that you can actually do. And then that becomes your habit. And then the next. And believe it or not, you're changing your chakras. We think changing the chakras is very woo-woo. The incense and lights and, psychic people and crystals. And I have a friend who does all that stuff on me and I love it. It's not that it's not true, but stacking up those dirty dishes changes my chakras. What makes me happy? Just going to bed when I'm tired? Just putting out a little more energy to do things a little better. Okay? In that same question was the question about don't worry, just meditate. I wasn't quoting Swami Kriyananda on that. The question thought I had. It's just sort of something. It's true. Lahiri Mahashaya, who was Yogananda's guru's guru, said to every question, just meditate, do Kriya Yoga, because that will increase the upward flow of energy in the spine. And the stronger that gets, the more the karma, simply the vrittis of karma, if the determination to go toward the light is stronger than my fear of this, my desire for that, my regret in this, my wish for this, my attachment to this, it only exists as an energy pattern. There's no reality to it except the energy you yourself have put into it over many incarnations, which has now become a whirling thing that takes the ping pong ball of your consciousness. If this flow, the flow of the river to the sea, is so powerful, the whirlpools just get swept in. This is why in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda writes about the tremendous power of Kriya Yoga meditation. Now, the reason it's powerful, let me phrase it differently. What he's saying is Kriya Yoga is a very simplified, clear technique of meditation that works directly on the Kundalini energy in the spine and works directly on resolving the vrittis and the chakras, which will resolve all your karma. Because the reason the karma, the vritti manifests in your life is because you need to, let me think how to say this, because the magnetic field is strong enough that it calls the experience to you so you can learn what you need to learn. But if you increase but the only reason it calls the experience to you is to free you from that distraction so that your energy will flow more harmoniously in agreement with your higher guidance. So if you just start living powerfully in agreement to your higher guidance, then the necessity for that karma to express in the world, it won't happen because you've already learned. It's no longer an unlearned lesson. But it's a very, very subtle dynamic, right? Sometimes, but when those vrittis are dissolved by the increase in the inner flow, then you have transcended the karma. It's literally resolved because it's no longer an unlearned lesson. It doesn't distract me anymore. I'm still looking here, so why bother? Like that. This is how spirituality expands within us. Whether you're a Catholic, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Jain, this is what spiritual development is. The dissolution of the vrittis, the increase of the inner energy. So everyone eventually finds a way to have this experience. Catholic saints, because they don't have a technique, often have to achieve the same goal through all kinds of physical suffering. It's one of the reasons, because the energy is increasing, but they don't have a systematic, scientific, harmonious way to work with it. But their devotion is so strong that the energy increases, but they don't know how to work with it. So Kriya is particularly effective because it saves you a lot of that confusion because you're cooperating with it, consciously cooperating with it. There was a question about is war and so on caused by the selfishness and the greed of individuals? Well, in a certain sense, yes. But we have to understand there is individual karma, there's national karma, there's global karma, and then there's, I don't know, cosmic karma probably, So individual karma is where enlightenment comes from. Planets do not become enlightened. Nations do not become enlightened. Individuals become God realized. But when we're choosing where to incarnate, we are stepping into an ongoing karmic story. And the question was also asked if Yogananda made prophecies. Oops. Okay. Slow down a little. Okay. Global karma, national karma, individual karma. When we choose where to incarnate, we are choosing to be part of national karma, family karma, because it's going to be suitable for us. Now, the degree to which we get caught up into it depends on our personal karma. Your family karma, this is a question that wasn't asked, but people say this. You're not, just because you incarnated in a family does not mean that you are compelled to follow the karma of that family. You may or you may not. There's lots of reasons. But your individual karma is always the dominant decision maker. But Swami put it, you choose to associate with certain influences, either to embrace them, to reject them, or just to pay no attention to them. All three of those options are equally valid. Speaking of the United States, Yogananda said, and these are part of his prophecies, that when the United States was settled, the Native Americans, the Native Americans called Indians because Columbus thought he'd found India, but the Native Americans, it was their land. And the European settlers, and they all just came in, and the Indians were extremely inconvenient for the ambitions of the people who were coming. So over a period of time, they simply exterminated them. And that was not a nice thing to have done, and that was not good karma. And one of the reasons that we exterminated them is because was because of financial greed. They were holding resources that the new settlers wanted because it would make our lives, I say our, I don't know who was, American lives, richer and more comfortable, but the Indians were in the way. So we got rid of them. That was bad karma. Yogananda says, overall, the USA has very, very good karma, but this issue with the American Indians is still a blot on the karma of the country that will have to be expiated. And because it was primarily financial greed that caused it, he said that the USA will have to have a much more serious period of economic depression. And once that is done, then the karma will be even, and the country will not be plagued by that history anymore. So I'm sure in your own country and every country, there are issues. And so choosing to incarnate in that country, those conditions, as they play themselves out, will conceivably impact my life or not, depending on how much the lesson is relevant for me. But it will still happen. And some of the people who are living there now may have been the very ones who exterminated those Indians. And so they may be incarnating in order to really suffer in order to balance what they did. Swami Kriyananda said that many of us were actually the exterminated Indians, and that in the US, the very strong movement toward ecology is being largely moved by the Native Americans whose land was taken away from them, whose way of life was destroyed, and now they're back trying to make it right, because they didn't have the power then to stop it, but the desire to stop it and put it into balance. You see how interesting it gets? And then everybody acts it out in their own way, whatever is appropriate for them. So it is selfishness, it is greed that causes war, it is violence and all of that, but not everybody. It's more powerful in some people than it is in others. But the fact that it will go on around us, it's the cosmic karma, the global karma that we came here to experience. Okay? Someone asked also, how do you know if something is your karma? Swami Kriyananda says, well, if it's happening to you, that's how you can tell. It's really not a subtle question. This is where people get really confused about karma. They'll say, oh, this one was a karma situation. Honey, everything was a karma situation. We are an energy pattern. We attract and repel according to who we are. So it's not whether it's your karma. The question is, how can I face it and resolve it so I don't have to just keep repeating? Somebody also asked about observing repeating patterns. You bet. And here's my picture. I shared this with Abe yesterday, but this is how I think about it. It's, our spine is the the focal point for our inner energy. And if you imagine there's a pole coming over here, I saw one of those barber poles with the stripes on it. Okay, imagine a pole like this, and it's striped, but the stripes are vertical, not horizontal. Okay, and the stripes are also very uneven. Sometimes they're wide, then they can get really skinny. They can seem almost to disappear, and then they can bust out wide again. And then sometimes a stripe will just disappear. You'll reach a point where it's not there anymore. Then imagine a spiral staircase surrounding that pole. And our spiritual growth, the pole is on, on one side or another. Let's say it's on the left. And our spiritual growth, we're gradually climbing the spiral staircase. Like this. And that means that right now I'm in a pink stripe. And that pink stripe maybe lasts for 7,000 incarnations. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a green stripe. And that stripe just is half of one incarnation because it's really skinny. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a pink stripe and it's gone in a year. And then I have another giant one that I go. But I'm slowly, if you're conscious, I'm slowly, very slowly making my way up the pole, just going through this. And each one of these stripes is something that's unique to my nature that I have to learn. So it always makes me nervous when somebody has gone like this and they've passed the whole green stripe. And then they announce, I have learned everything there is to learn about green. I have no more green karma, because there's no more green stripe. And then they go around like this, and gosh darn it, whack. There's another, there's another big piece of green karma. And so, yes, of course, we keep hitting repeating patterns, because there's often, it gets more and more and more subtle. So it's always nice to be humble. Humble is very, very helpful. And to be, I seem to have made some progress on this, instead of, well, that one's done, because it just sets you up to have the stripe be wider the next time. Well, I'm making progress. That's good. So when you see it again, you say, well, I guess I wasn't quite finished. Sometimes it gets lighter, and then sometimes it gets worse, because you may have either plumbed the depths or you've only scratched the surface. So when you see it again, just be very interested. See, this is, Yogananda said, life is designed for our education and our entertainment. I'm going to give you this. I think even in Japan, do you know the situation comedy called Friends, which is so popular in the U.S.? Okay, but it's this group of young Americans, and there's one character, and his name is Ross, and he's inept. Nothing ever works for him. He's good-hearted, but he's just the doofus, and nothing ever works for him. And this one actor played the part of Ross for like 10 years and became a gazillionaire, and, was very successful. I was never like an avid fan, but I've been entertained by that. In my mind, the actor and the character are the same. That man, his name is David, he's Ross as far as I'm concerned. Apparently they were shooting one of the episodes once, and there was some mix-up, and they all stepped back from it, and then they had to do it again. And the actor, and it was one of the many scenes in which things are not going well for Ross. And the actor, David, just before he steps back on the set, says, poor Ross. Like that. Nothing ever goes right for Ross. Ross doesn't even exist. He's just a fictional character. But the actor, had to play him like this. Guys, that's us. This whole adventure of who we are, we're actors. We're divine actors playing the part. And we need to be able to say about ourselves, poor Asha. She's so sincere. She tries so hard. And then sometimes it just doesn't go well for her. Okay, here we go. And we step back into the part. That's really the truth of who we are. And we forget. Swami Kriyananda said, I never identify with Swami Kriyananda, but Swami Kriyananda is an event for which I am responsible. Just like that actor is responsible for making Ross do what he's supposed to do. So that's the difference between being committed. You have to be committed. This is a responsibility and you have to do it well. But a piece of us, if we can, just needs to watch. Somebody, Michael Singer, who wrote some very good books, said there's a voice always going on in your head. But if you think about it, there's also somebody listening to the voice in your head. So which one are you? Are you the one who's talking or are you the one who's listening? And he suggested simply that the one you are the one who's listening, because that's the consistent one, because the voice in your head goes in all directions. And the one that's talking is your drunken roommate. And if you had a drunken roommate, you might let them babble on, but you wouldn't take them really seriously. Just that little step back. That's what we're looking for. Someone asked the question specifically about working with anger and also working with difficult people. It's all the same question, really. How do we manage? It's very helpful to do as much honest introspection as you can. What am I really angry about? And there was a question that was also asked about fairness. Like I said, karma is always fair, meaning it's always appropriate. This is not a thing like they made an administrative error and you were actually given karma that wasn't yours. Because it's an energy pattern, it is exactly in balance to what you're attracting. So if you have an issue with anger, and you know that you do, most of the time when you have a big issue, it also manifests in very small ways. And we tend to think about trying to attack the big picture. But what we really need to do is we need to nibble away at the edges. If we're very angry about some big thing that happened in our life, we can't start by trying to get rid of that. But you need to see how the same response is happening in other places where you just ignore it because it doesn't seem so important. Impatient with a driver on the street, upset because someone in your office didn't wash their coffee cup. Worried, angry because you spilled your coffee in the car. Once you begin to identify what your primary issues are, then consider it essential that you try to weed it out of every small area where it shows. This is very similar to be a little better than your worst. Because if you start changing your inclination, you start changing your chakras. You're working at it, you're diminishing it. If you only think that the big one is all that matters, it'll just continue on that way. Same question was asked about very difficult people that you have to deal with. Very difficult people are one of God's favorite ways of teaching us. So you have to ask yourself over and over, why does this upset me? And you can have an answer, well, because they're a terrible person and they're being unfair to me. And I'm, losing my promotion because this awful person, all of that can be true. Then you have to ask again, why does that upset me? What am I afraid of? What is really the core issue here? And then try to get it down to something, and you will find that actually has nothing to do with what's going on around you, and everything to do with our habitual demands and expectations of life. Well, because the world should not include people like this. In the community that I'm part of, where we all have lived together for decades and nobody's going away, this woman came and she was complaining bitterly about this difficult person. And she was right, a very difficult person. And she was on and on. And I said, wait, I have a really good idea. In our community, we have a sort of central green area. I said, let's take this person out into the central green and let's execute them. We could shoot them or hang them, whichever you prefer, and then we won't have to bother with them anymore. You know, of course, she was horrified, but really, what was she saying? You know, I want him to be different. I demand that he be different. How's that working for you? You know, where does this come from? Even the very idea that I can just declare reality and that reality must agree with me. You see, that's the question. What is really upsetting me? And if we're in the habit of thinking that the world must conform to me, we're probably doing it in lots of areas of our life. And then we have to start just chewing away at the edges. And over time, you will gradually shift your chakras and everything will be different. Okay? The last thing I was talking about when I was talking about difficult people, and saying we have this thought in our mind that the world should conform to us, several of you said, what? What? You know, let's explain that a little more clearly. The fact of the Indian caste system is well known, but nowadays, because of this, it's become a fixed form that's an instrument of social abuse in many ways. But the concept of there being different castes actually is a very elevated idea. It's just been corrupted because it's self-evident when you look around that people are at different levels of consciousness. And what is perfectly clear to one person is utterly obscure to someone else. And there are very interestingly, the 4 basic castes in India describe 4 basic stages of growing awareness. It's a very big subject that I don't have time to go into, but I'm just going to touch one piece of it. The second and the third caste, the Sanskrit word is Vaishya, and the archetype of a Vaishya is considered to be a merchant. Not that all merchants are Vaishyas, or not all Vaishyas are merchants. But the idea of merchant is, I'm perfectly willing to do something for you as long as you do something for me. Right. So I'm fair, I'm honest, but always something in it for me. And part of the characteristic of the Vaishya, because each of these castes have a characteristic of how they try to avoid suffering. And so the Vaishya caste tries to make the world conform to their idea of what it should be. And it's a step up from the lowest caste, which is Shudra, which the archetype is peasant, somebody who just works with their body, not their brain. And if you rise up from Shudra, you get enough energy to work for yourself, and that's progress. From having not enough energy to do anything to try to get rich. And the level of, so let's see, what was I going to say there? So the Vaishya has enough energy to want to make things the way he wants to make them. And the way he thinks that he's going to be happy, he's going to make the world conform. You know, my children are going to behave. I'm going to have a house. I'm going to have money. I'm going to get in with the government officials. I'm going to make the world the way I want it. And the Vaishya will put out lots of creative energy trying to make that work until he has enough experiences to realize that I can never make the world do what I want it to do. And so, as a method of ensuring my happiness, this is not going to work. Okay? And interestingly, a lot of social activism and sort of moral indignation at other people's abuse of the planet or abuse of other people, even though there's an unselfish element in it, it also falls under the Vaishya category because I need you to be different for me to be happy. Now, it's not purely selfish because it's also those people are suffering and you're making them suffer, but they're suffering. I want it different. You change. And because it's subtle, we often feel very justified in demanding that the others change because, after all, you are a jerk and you're doing the wrong thing. So we feel like we should feel this way. But the fundamental thought, and this is what I was saying earlier, is that for me to be happy, you have to be different. The problem with it is we can't make the world different because everybody has their own karma. And if that's their karma, you can't shift it. And if it's cosmic or national karma or global karma. So what happens is after you bang your head against being a Vaishya for a long time, you move up to being a Kshatriya. And the archetype for Kshatriya is the soldier king. Now, nowadays, almost not soldiers, but almost all kings are Vaishyas. They're in it for themselves. But the ideal is that the ideal king, like Lord Rama, is completely selflessly concerned for his people. And the soldier loves an ideal more than he loves his own life. And he works hard and he sacrifices for the principle that he believes in. And he realizes, now soldier breaks down in this way because a soldier may also fight, but the soldier realizes, the Kshatriya realizes that the only thing I can control is my own consciousness. And my effort needs to be directed not toward making the world different. The Kshatriya's understanding of how to create happiness for himself is that I have to change myself because it's the only place that I have any influence. And that's where the concept of the soldier comes, because the soldier is so disciplined because he has a higher principle that he's working with. So we have to move into, I can try to influence you because if I am a leader and a king, I'm going to try to lead you in the right direction. But the battle is not with you. The battle is with my own inner fight. The entire Mahabharata, the entire Bhagavad Gita, the field of Kurukshetra on which the Gita takes place is the field of inner consciousness. So we are being righteous Vaishyas. They ought to be different until our experience tells us very simply, this is not making me happy. And as long as my happiness is dependent on the world agreeing and conforming to my wishes, the price for that is I get to be unhappy. And after 7,000 lifetimes of that particular stripe, it crosses our mind that maybe the whole idea is wrong. And you're not really abandoning ideals, you're just moving up. Because if you can change your consciousness and radiate with a different energy, then you can actually influence the world around you. Because your idea now is not selfish. You know, it's not like I need you to be different. It's that I would love to serve you if I can. You know, and children are very clever at being able to tell. Children in the USA are probably more rebellious against their parents than they are here, but I'm not sure. But oftentimes, parent is saying to child, this is for your own good. And child can tell that this is just to make you comfortable, because mother is afraid. One of my young friends told me that, if I go out on an adventure and we drive the car, out into the desert, and then we run out of gas and we have to walk 5 hours through the desert in the middle of the night. For us, it's just fun, he said. If my mother had to do that, that would be a terrible problem for her. So she's always trying to make me behave like her because she can't imagine what I feel. And children can tell, you're just trying to make yourself feel good by making me conform to what you can do. And so that's what I was saying. It's not like you don't want to help them or uplift them, but as long as your motive is less than pure, the chances of your having an effect are greatly diminished. The chances of making yourself miserable are absolutely certain. Okay, does that make sense? That's why, well, here's an example from the time when the Christians were being thrown to the lions. And there was this great Christian saint, Saint Anthony, and he had lived decades in solitude in the desert. And then he found himself, he was drawn back. I think the city was Rome, if I have the details correct. And because he was so magnificent, even though the Christians who were going to be eaten by the lions were being held in this underground prison, the guards were so in awe of Anthony that he could walk in and out of that prison. And he would just go in and he would comfort those who were about to die, but he didn't rescue them. He just changed their consciousness and gave them the courage to do what they had to do. But he had changed himself so that he could actually just come in and change them. In the Indian tradition, there's an aphorism that says 1 minute in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. It means one person's consciousness that is really uplifted will resonate in those who are receptive, and then they will see something that they haven't seen before. Whereas if you're just shaking your finger and trying to make them different, they know that that's just about you. It's not about them. So this is all that I meant there. But if you start following that thread of how often our suffering is because we want the world to conform to what we want. There was a little boy who lived we had this ashram house in San Francisco. It was 5 stories, big house. About 30 people lived there, including a boy who was about 4. Big, sturdy little kid, small kid, but sturdy. He had a very strong will. And there was a wooden staircase that went through the center of the house, and there was a lot of wood, so sound echoed. He woke up at 3 in the morning. He was just tired of being asleep. He was ready to start his day. He crawled out of his bed. He went into the middle of the house, of the stairwell, and he shouted in his full child voice, "I want it to be morning." Like that. Woke up the entire house, but it wasn't morning. And he could say that 100,000 times. It was 3 and the sun was not going to come up. So ask yourself sometimes, if you're just standing on the stairwell at 3 in the morning, demanding that the sun rise, and then ask yourself, how is this helping me? And then you can go on from there. I was asked the question if Yogananda made any prophecies. And I mentioned it lightly, but Yogananda made many prophecies. In 1952, which was now 75, 76 years ago, he talked about World War. He talked about global depression. And he talked about earth cataclysm. And Swami Kriyananda was in the room when Yogananda talked about these things. And he said, Yogananda made it seem like it was going to happen tomorrow. He announced it on Sunday, and you felt like it was going to start on Monday. So all the 45 years that I was with Swamiji, every year he would sort of think, I wonder if this is the year. And then he passed away from the planet. And even though the world keeps being turbulent in lots of ways, the scale of what Yogananda said has not happened. Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, is one of the most active returning saints in any tradition. She's always somewhere, appearing to someone, like a good mother would, both in Fatima and most recently in Medjugorje. She also spoke of big changes, and they're not the only ones by any means. What Mother Mary said in Medjugorje, which is most interesting, among her message, she's been appearing for 30 years to these certain visionaries who were children when it started. She urges everyone to pray 3 hours a day. And she's supporting the Catholic prayer, but prayer is prayer. God doesn't care. And she said, and she spoke of, I believe, 10 cataclysmic things or something like that. Already, she said, because so many people have responded to her call to prayer, one of those has been mitigated because the purpose of it is being fulfilled. The purpose being to awaken people to another way of living. So these are the realities. And honestly, you do not need a prophet now. You just have to look at the world. And where I live in the US, where the anger and the confusion and the polarization is stunning, it just common sense tells you that this is going to blow up. Kriyananda's phrase simply, and he was talking, he said also, listen to the music. He said the music, I don't know what's popular here, but the so-called music is just dissonance, screaming dissonance, and hard beat that just affirms, I want, I want, I want. He said, just listening to the music, his phrase was, the world wants to go to war. It's just trying to work itself up to explode. Now, that's not us. That's not anybody, really, except somehow it's the cosmic karma that we see building. And it is unspeakably confusing, because who would want that? So it's part of, I don't know, the great mystery of life. But there are people who need these experiences. And apparently that includes us, not to create the violence or the catastrophe, but who have to be present as it happens, I believe, for what we can contribute in terms of light. I'm going to just say one more thing, and then we'll go to the next part here. Over the course of my life, because of my role and because I know a lot of people, I've had the opportunity to be present when a number of people have died, a dozen, 15 maybe, friends, including my own father. So relatives, but also people that I knew well or didn't know well. And I have a lot to say about death and dying, and it's always been of interest to me. But on occasion, I've been called into a situation a few times where one person drew me in, but most of the people were not at all interested in what I had to say. The most notable being when a man was going to be taken off life support, and we all knew that he would die at 3 p.m. on a certain Tuesday, which was really unusual. And his wife wanted me to be there when it happened. He had been unconscious, but suddenly as 3 o'clock came, he was wide awake. And when you're on the life support, you can't talk. But we're there, and nobody in the room wanted to hear what I might say about it. It just wasn't the right setting. But it was interesting to me because he was so conscious and so calm, which I knew him and I knew it was real. But they were determined that they were going to make him unconscious with drugs before they took him off the life support machine. I tried to tell the doctor that maybe they didn't need to do that, but no one in the room could even imagine that possibility. But I realized that just being in the room, being comfortable with karma, being comfortable with dying, being comfortable even with, well, I'm trying to influence and I'm not going to succeed. It's just, this is what's meant to happen. Honestly, the whole atmosphere in the room was different. And just that phrase, if there's one person in the room who has even a slightly different consciousness, the whole room can change. So if we think about troubled times, if we have done our work and are able to face into things that may cause other people to panic or to grieve or to break down, but not that we become cold or indifferent, but we're just not afraid. Everything can change. Okay?